August 20th, 1987. It's a sultry Thursday morning in Colorado Springs.
Most people are getting ready for work or taking their kids to school or, just getting their day started.
At the Pines apartment complex on the north side of town, Cynthia Anderson is busy straightening up before she heads off to work.
I was in my apartment cleaning. I heard a sound. I thought maybe fireworks. Didn't think a lot about it. I needed to go outside to empty my trash.
But Cynthia makes a terrifying discovery in the parking lot.
Oh my.
There was a woman lying on the ground.
Are you okay? Are you okay? What happened to you? Are you okay?
There was kind of a rumbling in the throat. And that was all I heard from her.
Help! Somebody help! Call 911! Somebody help!
Moments later, Officer Regino Trujillo receives an urgent call from dispatch.
Car 75, go ahead.
The call I received that morning was a shots fired call.
2-4, I'll be en route.
It's an older type area, pretty quiet.
8 o'clock in the morning is an unusual time for the police department to get a shots fired call. Those kinds of incidents tend to occur usually in the evening or late night hours.
As I approached the scene, I observed a lady lying on the ground. Her hair was full of blood and a lot of blood on the ground. I knew her condition was pretty bad.
Looks like we've got one with a gunshot wound to the head. Have the 47 step it up, please.
Moments later, paramedics arrive. They load the woman into an ambulance and rush her to the nearest hospital.
They worked on her for about a half hour and came out and pronounced her dead.
Across town, Lt.Joe Kenda is giving his team the morning rundown.
Any further on the Randall case? So I need the officers that are assigned to that to go back out and recanvass the neighborhood.
Shortly before 8, I'd have a team meeting with my people and would discuss what we're going to do today, what's on the schedule, what's happening with this case, what's happening with that case. During that meeting, the phone rings to report that a woman's been found shot at the rear of an apartment building. We now have a new plan. Our plan will involve whatever this involves.
All right, plans have changed. We have a possible homicide. Davis and Dyring, you're with me. The rest of you know your assignments. You're dismissed.
When Kenda arrives, onlookers have already gathered at the scene.
The neighbors are, as they always are, in situations of violence, very, very distraught. They know this is a very bad thing.
Kenda locates Officer Trujillo, who briefs him on the situation.
Your first officer on scene?
Yes.
Can you tell me about the victim?
The deceased has been identified as 30-year-old Lindy Lapham. She was found next to her car, a single gunshot wound to the head.
Through the back of the skull, exit through the forehead, large caliber. 1 round only.
All right, take me to the scene.
Kenda examines the blood-soaked asphalt where Lindy's body was discovered.
There's a lot of blood on the ground. There is blood on the car and some hair on the car. That's transfer from an explosive gunshot wound to the head. The human head is a vacuum. Introduce a supersonic projectile, very bad things happen.
Kenda wonders, was this a robbery gone wrong? Or was Lindy Lapham the target of a cold, calculated killer?
Emotional killing. You shoot someone several times. You want to make certain they're dead. You're angry. You are pulling the trigger until the gun goes click. She's only been shot once. She is dressed in business attire, skirt, blouse, heels, nylons. That's important to me at that point. It tells me that she is on her way to work and it's probably her car. That would indicate that this is not something she anticipated. That fits more to the robbery scenario.
Expended slugs or casings would tell Kenda more about the murder weapon, but there are none to be found. So Kenda and his men turn to the many bystanders that have gathered at the scene.
Somebody says they heard a pop. Somebody else said it was a firecracker. We have other witnesses, other neighbors who say there have been prowlers lately in the area.
It's a ragtag collection of statements, but it doesn't take long for a concrete lead to materialize.
Can you tell me what you saw?
There was a man walking around here this morning with a rifle in his hand.
Somebody says they see somebody with a rifle in the neighborhood. A guy with a rifle, like 8 o'clock in the morning? What's that about? So I tell the patrol supervisor, get some patrol officers in here. See who's around, who's walking. Is there a rifle laying in the street? Let's learn all we can as quickly as we can to try to give us a direction in which to proceed. Right now, we don't have one.
As patrol officers fan out across the neighborhood, Kenda talks to eyewitness number 1, Cynthia Anderson.
So you knew the victim?
She knows Lindy Lapham. She knows her husband. They have a child whose name is Brandon.
Can you tell me which apartment she lived in?
She doesn't live here.
Really?
Her parents do.
Cynthia also tells us that Lindy's parents are Hank and Ola Mae Waller.
When Lindy went to work, she would drop the grandson off, and Grandpa and Grandma would watch him, so they get very, very close to him.
Her parents are the resident managers in this complex. She brings her son over here to get babysat by her parents. Okay, well, that explains why she's here.
They live in apartment B.
Can you grab a couple uniforms, have them go to apartment B, see if they can find the parents? Police department.
Kenda turns his attention to Lindy's car.
We always search vehicles associated with victims or with suspects to determine if there is any evidence in them that may pertain to this event. Anything that may provide information of meaning to the investigation.
But Kenda's search of the victim's car is quickly interrupted.
A policeman yells at me and says, "You better come over here." I hear that a lot at crime scenes, and it's never anything very interesting. Well, this time was totally different.
But not even Kenda is prepared for the gruesome scene that awaits inside apartment B.
My stomach drops. This has gone from a single murder to a bloodbath.
Lt.Joe Kenda is investigating the murder of working mom Lindy Lapham, found shot in the parking lot of a Colorado Springs apartment complex. One neighborhood resident has provided a helpful clue.
Somebody says they see somebody with a rifle in the neighborhood.
In addition, Kenda has just learned the victim's parents, Hank and Ola Mae Waller, live in the complex. But a search of their apartment reveals a grisly scene.
I expected it to be a single victim homicide. Now, we have 4 victims. I'm not sure what this is yet, other than it is a mess.
One of the victims still clings to life.
There's a little boy on the floor. He's covered in blood. His head is covered in blood. The EMTs are doing CPR. I've seen enough victims to know that this little boy isn't going to make it through this. You just get sick to the stomach when you see that. It's a little kid.
Despite EMT's best efforts, the child is pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital.
It's a real tragedy, and it's something that strikes an emotional chord not only to investigators, but I think to the community as well.
You can never get accustomed to the death of a child. They stay with me, every one of them, and they're still with me now.
Nevertheless, Kenda keeps his mind focused on the investigation.
Based on the information I have, I believe that the male on the floor is Hank Waller, Jr. I believe the one on the bed is Ola Mae Waller. And I believe the child that had been removed was Brandon, who is Lindy's child.
Who would want to execute the entire Waller family?
This is now a multiple event, and I don't know where to begin.
Kenda decides to start with Hank Waller.
Single gunshot wound to the head. Looks like a large caliber weapon.
Hank appears to have been killed by the same type of gun as his daughter Lindy and his grandson.
Part of his head's missing. There are skull fragments and brain tissue on the walls, on the windowsill, dripping from the curtains. We have a terrible looking scene. They're all terrible. This is certainly more than most.
The position of Hank's body gives Kenda insight into where he was the moment he was shot.
Humans, when they die standing erect, one foot will cross the other. It's referred to as the dead man's fall. Hank took that gunshot wound standing up and fell dead on the floor, causing his feet to cross over each other.
Kenda notices another clue sprayed across Hank's abdomen.
There is a mist of blood. This is referred to as high-velocity blood spatter.
The blood is probably from Hank's grandson, meaning young Brandon was likely standing right next to his grandfather when he was murdered.
Was he protecting this boy from somebody with a gun?
It would seem so, but there's an X factor in that equation. The fourth victim, Ola Mae Waller.
What's most interesting to me is her positioning. She's on top of a bedspread. Her legs are together. Her hands are on her stomach, one over the other. She is posed. Someone wants her to look nice.
Unlike the rest of her family, Ola Mae wasn't shot.
She has bruising around her throat that I would associate with manual strangulation.
But on the front of Ola Mae's nightgown, Kenda notices a series of markings at odds with the strangulation theory.
Several puncture wounds in her chest. I don't know what the weapon is. It doesn't look like a knife.
I had never seen small cylindrical puncture wounds like that. They are perfectly round, and the only thing that came to mind was an ice pick, which is a rare thing.
With no ice pick in sight, Kenda is about to search the rest of the house when a glimmer of metal catches his eye.
We got a weapon.
The Smith & Wesson Model 19 .357 Magnum revolver, blue steel. That is the same weapon carried by every police officer on the police department. I recognized it immediately.
The .357 revolver is a powerful revolver that is capable of doing a lot of damage.
We opened the cylinder.
6 rounds in it, 3 of them expended. Got a bag?
3 shots have been fired from that weapon.
Is it possible there are 2 killers on the loose? Someone, perhaps a former cop, wielding this revolver, and the rifleman spotted just prior to the murder. To Kenda, it seems unlikely.
We have Lindy shot once in the head. We have Hank shot once in the head. We have Brandon shot once in the head. At this point, having found this weapon, having found these victims, having looked at the physical evidence, we're no longer looking for a man with a rifle. It is very likely this is our murder weapon.
If his hunch is right, it explains the missing casing outside. It was still in the cylinder of the revolver. It also means this is no random act. The Wallers were targeted execution style.
Everything I know at this point tells me the Wallers are a wonderful, salt-of-the-earth, middle-class family. Why would someone do this?
Kenda has the revolver sent to a lab for testing. But there are still the unusual puncture wounds on Olame's chest, which definitely weren't made by a .357.
We were searching for a weapon which could be an ice pick or a similar device. We don't know what it is.
A search of the apartment yields no ice pick, but they do find a toolbox.
We find 2 tools that are long, narrow-shafted tools used for punching holes into leather or wood. Either one of these are the correct size to inflict those wounds.
Neither tool is bloody, which suggests the killer wiped them clean to cover his tracks.
Are they hidden? No, they're hidden in plain sight. They're where they're supposed to be. To me, that says some level of planning, some level of scheme. Clever enough to not try to conceal them, make them apparent, and thus make them not involved.
The tools join the revolver at the crime lab for processing. Kenda now has 3 potential murder weapons and a slew of physical evidence. Still, he's no closer to catching his killer.
Every murder case has a point of despair. You don't know where to go next. You just don't have a clue. And you feel so awful.
But just when it seems the investigation has hit rock bottom, something catches Kenda's attention.
There are 5 glasses on the table, 1 at each place setting, and there's orange juice poured in each one of the glasses. If we count the people we know of so far, we have a total of 4. Who's the other glass for?
Before Kenda has a chance to answer that question,
Lieutenant,
his men uncover a clue.
you better take a look at this.
It's a note retrieved from the car of victim number 1, Lindy Lapham.
It says, I'm still having major trouble with Bob. Talk to you later, and it's signed Lindy. We're having trouble with Bob. Well, who's Bob? Is he having that kind of trouble with this family that he decides to take them out? That's entirely possible, particularly when we're missing a breakfast guest.
Kenda gathers his troops and issues a new mandate.
Need you guys to head out and see if you can find anyone that knows of Bob.
Bob has now moved to the top of my list. Bob's only excuse is to be here dead, and he isn't. So where is he? Put out a lookout for Bob. I need to find him right now.
Lt.Joe Kenda is working one of the most harrowing cases of his career. The Wallers, their daughter Lindy, and their grandson Brandon have been ruthlessly murdered in their home. A table set for 5 suggests there was someone else present that morning.
Lieutenant?
And a mysterious letter from one of the victims has clued Kenda in to a potential suspect.
It says, I'm still having major trouble with Bob. Talk to you later. And it's signed Lindy. Lindy is our victim. Now, who exactly is Bob? So I'm looking at this note and I'm thinking, okay, Bob added in with this group makes 5. Is Bob the 5th orange juice?
Hey, Lieutenant. Detective Davis found the homeowners upstairs in the balcony if you want to speak with them.
All right, great, thank you.
Thanks.
While I'm thinking about this, I'm told that the owners of the property have arrived outside.
How you doing? I'm Detective Kenda.
Kenda breaks the shocking news to the landlords, Clyde and Eva Monette.
They are incredibly distressed at the time I talk to them. They paint a picture of Hank Waller Jr. and his wife Olame as wonderful people. Hank is a great manager, been employed by them for several years to run this apartment complex. Nothing but compliments from everyone.
They were just awfully good people.
According to the Monettes, Hank and Olame had been happily married for over 3 decades. The couple met every challenge as a team, and Hank helped Olame tackle a debilitating illness head-on.
Olame was confined to a wheelchair. She had multiple sclerosis, but her husband, Hank, he took really good care of her.
Good people.
Hank was the primary caregiver, and what I mean by that is he had to lift her out of a chair, he had to lift her out of bed.
In turn, Ola May was there for Hank during his own time of need.
Hank had also suffered a stroke a couple of years ago, but ultimately was able to continue working.
Oh yeah, he was a little bit slower and a little more deliberate in his walk and his talk, but he was still Hank.
Can you think of anyone that would want to harm them?
I really can't, no.
They can't imagine that Hank and Ola May would have an enemy in the world.
At least until Kenda mentions Lindy's mysterious troublemaker.
Do you by any chance know someone named Bob?
I say to them, we found a note where Lindy says she's having trouble with Bob. Do you know what that's about? Oh boy, do we. Please explain.
Well, he was estranged from Lindy, and he did make some threats.
Bob's her husband. They've been having trouble for some extended period of time. It's our understanding he no longer lives at home, that he moved out. So he's threatened them? Oh yeah. Not only is he estranged from his wife, who is now dead, he's threatened the Waller family, who also happens to be dead.
The Monettes inform Kenda that Bob Lapham works at Memorial Hospital. But a quick call raises suspicion.
Lieutenant, I called the hospital. They said Bob wasn't there today.
Now this is even more interesting. He's not where he's supposed to be. He's not here either. So exactly where is he? Crossing the Kansas border? I don't know, but I want to find out.
Perhaps Bob's co-workers can shed some light on his whereabouts.
We need to find out who he works with. If he's not there with this scheduled absence, exactly what is happening with Bob.
But when Kenda arrives at the hospital, he makes an unexpected discovery.
How you doing? I'm Detective Kenda. I'm here to get some information on a Bob Lapham. I understand he's not here right now, but could I talk to his supervisor?
Bob is here.
He's here right now?
Yes.
There was a mistake. Whoever answered the phone admitted that they thought he wasn't there, but in fact he was there, and he was there as scheduled.
Can you direct me to him?
I sure can. Right this way.
Bob Lapham?
Yes.
How you doing? I'm Detective Kenda.
Nice to meet you.
There's no easy way to tell you this. Your wife and your son were murdered today.
He was an emotional wreck.
Homicide investigators have kind of a daunting task of having to sometimes make that balance between notifying family members of a death, but also keeping an eye open for possible signs that they perhaps could be involved.
I know this is difficult, but can you tell me about your relationship with Lindy?
Strained. We had problems.
He admits that he's had trouble with his wife. He says that they just argue a lot and they seem to have grown apart.
Bob says they decided to divorce. The news upset her parents.
Her dad wanted us to get back together. Hank, he tried to help.
When was the last time you saw her or talked to her?
She called this morning. Her dad had asked me to breakfast. She was calling to ask if I would come.
Bob said he couldn't get there because he had to go to work early that morning. And he explained that he didn't want to confront Hank. So that fact alone indicated to me the likelihood was great that the orange juice had been poured for him. He just never went there.
Would you submit to a gunshot residue test?
Yeah, of course.
The moment Bob agrees to the GSR test, Kenda tells him it won't be necessary.
Everything about what he says is very reasonable. He's in this hospital in front of 12 co-workers during the time frame of the event. Plus his cooperative nature, his willingness to submit to any physical examinations allowed me to just continue interest in him. This has gone completely south on us. Now we're back to the beginning. Who came in to the Waller house and killed everybody and then killed Lindy outside in the parking lot? Who did that and why? When I reached the point of frustration with lack of information, obvious suspects have disappeared, then you go back to the crime scene. The crime scene will tell you if you listen. I missed something. I didn't see something. I didn't spend long enough there. Something.
What Lieutenant Kenda doesn't realize is that in returning to the crime scene, he'll uncover a piece of evidence unlike any he's seen before.
Is this a consideration of who needs to die first? What are we up against here?
Lt. Joe Kenda has returned to the scene of a quadruple homicide that claimed the lives of Lindy Lapham, her young son Brandon, and her parents. With all other leads exhausted, Kenda orders his men to again search the crime scene top to bottom in hopes of uncovering new evidence.
We don't know what we're looking for yet until perhaps we see it. But that means every item, every object, every piece of paper, we're going to see if it compares to something that may be significant to this case. We're looking for something that might be very small, that maybe has a very soft voice, but it still might speak to you. You have to listen. You have to look for that little thing that might make a difference.
Lieutenant, got something you need to see.
What is it?
It doesn't take long for Kenda's men to strike gold.
Look a list, sir.
I had never seen anything like that.
Found it in this magazine.
Halfway through all of them.
We start finding pieces of paper in the magazines, handwritten. They're kill lists. Kill the president. Kill the governor of the state of Colorado. Kill the mayor of Colorado Springs.
The names on these kill lists suggest they're the work of some paranoid anti-government type. But the more strips of paper Kenda reads, the more personal they become.
Now we're naming the family. Kill Bob, kill Ola May, kill Lindy, kill Brandon, kill Hank. The same names in different order. Is this a consideration of who needs to die first? What are we up against here?
That was not only a surprising find, but it really changes the course of your investigation.
Staring at the lists, Kenda wonders, did the killer leave these strips of paper behind as some sort of calling card? If so, why would they be buried in such an unlikely spot?
At some point in many homicide investigations, you realize that there's something missing here. There's something I don't see. There's a hole in the story. There's something that doesn't work based on my knowledge of human nature. It's very disturbing to me when I can't put my finger on what it is. So while I'm thinking all this over, I get a phone call from the laboratory announcing that the registration on the gun, that particular serial number, is assigned to Hank Waller Jr.
The fact that the primary murder weapon is registered to one of Kenda's victims suggests two very different possibilities. One is that the owner of the gun, Hank Waller, is responsible for this. But Kenda and his team are inclined to discount this theory.
I think it's safe to say that Hank does not fit the profile of other suspects. In fact, he appeared to fit the profile of a very fine, upstanding citizen.
The second possibility is that the killer knew Hank Waller well enough to know where he kept his .357 Magnum. Did someone from the family's inner circle write those kill lists and then act on them? If so, who is it and where are they now? To answer that question, Kenda needs to speak to someone who knows the Wallers intimately.
I was aware from the Monnets that Hank was a religious person.
Kenda finds the family address book and the phone number for a Reverend Ed Beck.
I was at Hank and Ola May's house quite often, so I knew them quite well. I think because of my position as senior pastor of the church and his pastor, he trusted me.
Kenda arranges a meeting to speak with Reverend Beck.
Detective Kenda.
Oh, hello, Detective.
How you doing?
How are you?
The Reverend doesn't know of any enemies, but he does share a heartbreaking family secret.
When I first met him before the stroke, he was a very genteel, very caring person, loved his family.
After the stroke, he became very depressed. He became very self-loathing. He was very angry at himself. It just wasn't the same person that we knew.
The stroke usually causes loss of prior function, such as weakness or numbness or loss of vision, loss of intellect, loss of speech, or even loss of emotional understanding of what people are saying.
The stroke that he experienced changed his personality. Over a period of time, he became quite depressed.
Hank confided in Reverend Beck that he was worried about Ola May's multiple sclerosis.
You understand that God has a plan for you and your family.
I don't know if I can keep taking care of her. And if something happens to me, what happens to her?
I know you
and what happens to my grandson? And what happens to the house and everything? I can't.
Every time he left my office, we had a prayer time together.
Keep them strong, keep them faithful.
Everything was going to be better, and, he went out smiling.
The story of Hank's stroke-induced depression is a revelation, but Kenda's not sure what to make of it.
The stroke changed his personality. What else did it do?
Wondering how this information plays into the massacre or what connection it has to the mysterious kill lists, Kenda heads back to the crime scene.
We're still in control of it. We don't move the bodies until we're ready to, and we weren't ready to. Something is here that will tell us something. We'll know when we find it, but we have to look for it.
Scanning the room, Kenda notices a pile of papers.
I'm looking at the table where outgoing mail is in place. I see a letter addressed to Mary Elizabeth, the daughter.
In addition to Lindy, Hank and Ola May have a daughter who lives in New Mexico.
I open it. It hasn't been mailed. It's handwritten. It's talking about the trouble in the family and what a bad thing Bob has done. And it's signed Love, Dead.
Kenda has a bad feeling about the author of the letter.
I look at the handwriting in that letter, and I look at the handwriting on my kill list, and in my opinion, they're the same. Immediately, I connected. I take those two pieces of paper and I walk to the bedroom door and I look at Hank. And my experiences tell me what happened here. I come to a conclusion that makes me want to throw up.
In the hunt for the killer responsible for the gruesome murder of the Waller family, a pair of stunning revelations has led Lt.Joe Kenda to a horrifying new theory. Kindly grandfather Hank Waller murdered his family and then took his own life.
Hank, you crazy son of a bitch. You've killed your family. Why would you do that? Why would you kill a helpless little boy and the daughter that loved you and the wife that's been devoted to you for all of your life? Why would you do that?
Pastor Ed Beck said Hank was struggling with depression after his stroke.
Hank had gone through changes in his personality. No one perceived any of that as being particularly dangerous.
So what pushed Hank over the edge? To find out, Kenda calls the Waller's other daughter, Mary, who lives in New Mexico.
This is Mary.
My mother was telling me for months before this happened that there was something wrong with my dad. Wrong with him up here. The look in his eyes had become kind of vacant in a way that, that sparkle, that liveliness in him, it really kind of disappeared. She wanted him to go to a psychologist and she couldn't get him to go.
Mary tells Kenda she didn't realize how serious the situation was until very recently, when her father called her, despondent over Lindy's impending divorce.
The things he was saying to me were really, really irrational. He was saying things like, I can't allow this to happen. This just can't happen. I'm not going to, lose control of, my, being able to see my grandson.
For all the other issues that he suddenly came up with after his stroke, the one that totally distressed him was Bob ending his marriage to Lindy. That made him furious.
It appears that he finally reached his breaking point, that his ability to cope was completely depleted, and his ability to hope was completely depleted.
After speaking with Mary, Kenda has a clearer picture of how the crime went down.
He was going to kill the people on his kill list. He was inviting everybody over, including his son-in-law that he now hated, because he was number one on the list. He didn't want Ola to interfere, and the only way to stop that was to kill her. So he did so early that morning.
His plan was to kill my mother quietly. So he first tried to strangle her, and he didn't have enough strength in his left hand to sufficiently strangle her to death.
To finish the job, Hank stabbed her 20 times with a hole-punching tool. Then he gently folded her arms across her stomach and laid in wait for Lindy and his grandson to arrive. That's when Hank's plan hit a snag.
When Lindy came, she didn't come in.
Hey,
Dad.
how are you?
Good.
Hey, little man.
He's here for breakfast.
Great, come on in.
I'm gonna drop him off. I'm already late for work, so I'm gonna go.
He said, come to breakfast. No, well, no. I gotta go.
Well, why don't you just come in just for a minute?
I can't. I've still gotta go. I'm already late.
With Lindy unwilling to stay, and with her estranged husband a no-show, Hank had to improvise.
He followed her out the door into the parking lot.
Lindy, please, just come in
I'll
just
be
for
back
5
after
minutes.
work.
Lindy, I just need to speak to you just for a minute. I want to have breakfast with you.
Shot her in the head in the parking lot.
Lindy!
With his wife and daughter now dead, Hank saved the most heartbreaking act for last.
I'm still thinking about that high-velocity blood spatter on his shirt. And I realize why it's there. He put his grandson in a headlock and shot him through the head while he was holding him. Then he put the gun to his forehead and pulled the trigger.
I think that was one of the things for me that was most chilling, was that obviously this was well thought out. It was something that Hank had been thinking about for a long time.
Hank Waller's death is officially ruled a suicide. Kenda's report lists the deaths of Ola Mae Waller, Lindy Lapham, and 7-year-old Brandon Lapham as homicides. A week later, Hank Waller's pastor, the Reverend Ed Beck, invites Kenda to speak to the grieving congregation about the tragedy.
I'd like to thank Reverend Beck for inviting me here today to speak to you. I just wish it was under better circumstances. What happened to the members of your congregation was a tragedy.
The person you knew and loved is not the person that did this. When that stroke happened, it produced an unraveling of his personality to the point of lunacy.
I hope that in the future, other families are able to recognize the signs and are able to get the help they need to avoid other hardships and other senseless losses. Thank you again for having me.
He believed at that moment, apparently, this was their only chance for a better experience beyond this world.
And the most important thing is that I want people to know that this can happen to you. Somebody around you starts having a personality change and saying crazy things and so on. Just, make up an excuse to go get them an ice cream and drive them right straight to the appointment that you've made them at the psychologist's office and get them started so that she can try to figure out what's going on, because those biological changes and those personality changes are the tip of the iceberg, and there may be a lot below that.
Well, I think Stephen King said it best about what is horror. Horror is the coming undone of something good. And this is what happened here. He came undone. and took others with him.
I still see Brandon on that gurney. I always will. It's a little boy. What is his part in this? Being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Does it go away? No, it never goes away. It never will.
The phone rang at 2:17 a.m., and by the time it stopped, a life in New York had already slipped out of reach, leaving behind a silence so loud it would echo for years, because this was the kind of silence that only follows a disappearance, the kind that creeps into hallways, stairwells, subway tunnels, and late-night newsrooms, the kind that refuses to stay buried. It was October 2007, the city humming as it always did, lights burning through the night, taxis cutting through rain-slick streets, and somewhere between a crowded bar in lower Manhattan and a quiet apartment uptown, a woman vanished without a sound, without a witness who stayed, without a single moment caught cleanly on camera. By morning, the headlines were already sharpening their knives. Missing. Vanished. Last seen alive. Cold case in the making. Her name was Lena Hart. 29 years old. Marketing executive. Reliable. Predictable. The kind of person who texted when she was running late and called her sister every Sunday night without fail. On the evening she disappeared, she did everything right. She left work on time. She met friends for one drink, just one, at a narrow bar lit in amber and noise. She paid her tab at 9:42 p.m. The receipt would later be bagged and tagged, a small square of paper elevated to evidence. She stepped outside, pulled her coat tighter against the cold, and pointed herself toward home. That was the last confirmed moment. After that, the timeline fractures, splinters into rumor and shadow, into what ifs and almosts, into the dark space where certainty goes to die. By dawn, her apartment was untouched. Her bed unslept in. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her purse was gone, her wallet with it, but her passport sat neatly in a drawer, her laptop charging where she'd left it, her life paused mid-sentence. Detectives stood in her doorway, breathing in the stale air, scanning for signs of a struggle and finding none. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. No blood. Just absence, clean and terrifying. Outside, the city kept moving, but inside that apartment, time stopped. The neighborhood reacted fast. Flyers bloomed on lampposts and storefronts like a second skin. Lena's face stared back from every corner, smiling, unaware of the storm about to swallow her. Friends retraced her steps with detectives, walking the same blocks, counting the same minutes, replaying the night until it felt unreal. Bartenders swore she left alone. A bouncer remembered nothing unusual. A cab driver thought he saw someone who looked like her, maybe, but couldn't be sure. Surveillance cameras offered only fragments, Lena crossing a street, Lena disappearing behind a delivery truck, Lena reduced to pixels and motion blur. Then nothing. The trail ended in the open, as if the city itself had erased her. Within days, the case exploded across local news. A young professional vanishing in Manhattan was catnip for headlines. Mysterious disappearance shocks community. No trace after night out. Reporters camped outside her building. Neighbors speculated in hushed voices. Everyone had a theory, and none of them agreed. Some whispered about a random predator, a crime of opportunity in a city that never sleeps. Others pointed to someone she knew, someone close enough to slip through her defenses without a fight. The police said little, their faces tight, their answers careful. They were still looking. They were following leads. They urged patience. But patience is hard to sell when every hour stretches the fear thinner and thinner. The investigation widened. Phone records were pulled. Bank accounts scrutinized. Her credit card showed no activity after that night, no trail of spending to chase. Her cell phone last pinged off a tower near the bar, then went dark. Friends were interviewed again and again, their stories dissected for inconsistencies that never quite appeared. Ex-boyfriends were tracked down, co-workers questioned, neighbors asked about strange noises they might have heard weeks earlier. Each lead sparked hope, then fizzled into nothing. A reported sighting in Brooklyn collapsed under scrutiny. A tip about a woman matching her description boarding a bus out of state went nowhere. The city offered up ghosts, and the detectives chased them until their shoes wore thin. As weeks turned into months, the language shifted. The word missing gave way to darker terms, spoken quietly, reluctantly. Cold case hovered at the edges of conversations, a threat no one wanted to name. Lena's family learned the rituals of waiting, the endless phone checks, the late-night calls that jolted them awake with hope before crushing it again. Her mother sat by the window each evening, watching the street as if Lena might simply walk back into frame, as if this could all still rewind. Her sister became the voice, the one who spoke to cameras, who begged for information, who memorized the sound of her own plea. Then came the strange details, the kind that lodged themselves in the mind and refused to let go. A witness who claimed to hear an argument near the subway entrance around 10 p.m., though no one else corroborated it. A neighbor who reported a scream but couldn't say when, or from where. A single glove found blocks away, black wool, unremarkable, impossible to definitively link to Lena yet impossible to ignore. Detectives logged it, bagged it, moved on. The case file grew thick, heavy with paper and unanswered questions. By the one-year mark, the media attention thinned. New stories replaced the old. Lena's face faded from the nightly news, replaced by fresher tragedies, fresher mysteries. But the case didn't die. It sank. Detectives revisited the bar, the street, the cameras. New technology teased new possibilities. Old evidence was re-examined under brighter lights. Still nothing broke. The city, so loud and crowded, had swallowed a person whole. Rumors filled the vacuum. Online forums dissected every known detail, every leaked whisper. Armchair detectives mapped routes, timed walks, argued over theories with the fervor of true believers. Some insisted she'd planned it, that she'd chosen to disappear, shedding her life like a skin. Those who knew her bristled at that idea. Lena was grounded. She had plans. She had a future. Disappearances like this didn't happen without violence, they said, without something going terribly wrong. Years passed. The case crossed the invisible line from recent to old, from urgent to unresolved. Detectives retired. New ones inherited the file, reading through it like a grim novel whose ending had been torn out. They saw the same photos, the same transcripts, the same dead ends. The city changed around the absence. Bars closed. New ones opened. Buildings were renovated. Streets were repaved. But somewhere in the layers of asphalt and memory, the moment Lena vanished remained preserved, untouched. Every anniversary brought a ripple of attention. A candlelight vigil. A brief headline. 10 years later, questions remain. Each time, hope flared and dimmed. The family learned to live with the ache, to carry it quietly. But the case refused to stay quiet. It lingered in precinct hallways, in training sessions about unsolved disappearances, in the cautionary tales told to rookies. It became a reference point. A reminder. A warning. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, something shifted. A file was pulled from storage. A note circled in red. A name resurfaced, one that had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. The past stirred, unsettled, as if the city itself had exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. Somewhere between what was known and what was assumed, a crack appeared, thin and fragile, but real. The silence that began with a phone ringing at 2:17 a.m. started to change its shape, no longer empty, no longer still, but charged, heavy with the possibility that the truth, buried deep in the noise of New York, had been waiting patiently for the right moment to speak. The file came down from the shelf with a soft thud, the sound of cardboard and dust meeting a metal desk, and inside it the past waited exactly as it had been left, brittle and unfinished, every page a frozen second from 2007, every photo a reminder that time does not heal what it refuses to explain. The detective who opened it had not been on the force when Lena Hart disappeared, had not walked those streets in the raw days after, had not watched hope drain from her family's faces in real time, and that distance gave him something dangerous and necessary: fresh eyes. He read the reports in order, then out of order, letting the story break apart and reform, looking for seams, for moments where the narrative felt too smooth, too easy, because real life is never neat, and disappearances especially have a way of hiding their violence behind routine. He started with the night itself, not the headlines, not the rumors, but the minutes. 9:42 p.m. Receipt signed. 9:44. Lena steps outside, camera catches her profile, scarf up, hair loose. 9:47. She pauses at the corner, checks her phone. 9:49. A shadow crosses behind her, unidentifiable, gone in 2 frames. After that, nothing. No more cameras. No more timestamps. Just a hole punched clean through the timeline. The detective circled that gap in his mind, the way you circle a wound, knowing that's where the damage hides. The bar staff had been interviewed 3 times each, their statements consistent, almost rehearsed. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't upset. She didn't leave with anyone they recognized. Friends confirmed it. But the detective lingered on one line buried in a supplemental report, a throwaway detail from a waitress who mentioned a man standing near Lena as she paid, close enough to hear her order, close enough to lean in and say something that made her frown for just a second before she smiled again. At the time, it went nowhere. Too vague. Too common. In New York, proximity means nothing. Still, the detective underlined it, feeling that faint prickle of instinct that comes when something small refuses to stay small. He moved on to the witnesses outside, the ones who had come forward in the weeks after, when the city was still buzzing with her name. The argument near the subway entrance. The scream that might have been laughter. The glove. None of it had ever connected. Each piece floated alone, unmoored, impossible to lock together. But reading them years later, stripped of urgency, he noticed patterns in the chaos. The times overlapped more than anyone had realized. The locations clustered tighter. The scream, if it existed, lined up with the argument within a window of minutes. The glove had been found along the most direct walking route from the bar to Lena's apartment, not blocks away as memory had inflated it, but just far enough to suggest it fell during movement, not after. The detective requested the physical evidence, what little there was, and waited. When the glove arrived, sealed and yellowed with age, he handled it carefully, aware that it had spent more time in darkness than in light. Back in 2007, DNA testing had been attempted and yielded nothing usable. Technology had improved since then. He knew that. Everyone knew that. Cold cases lived and died on that hope. But hope alone doesn't reopen files. Something else had nudged this one awake. That something came from a different direction entirely. A financial crimes unit, digging into an unrelated case, had flagged a name that made the detective pause. The name appeared in Lena's phone records, once, late, a missed call logged at 10:03 p.m. the night she vanished. At the time, it had been dismissed as a wrong number, a one-off, not worth chasing. But the name now belonged to a man recently arrested on charges that painted a different picture, a man with a history of opportunistic violence, a man who had lived, in 2007, 3 subway stops from Lena's apartment. The detective stared at the screen, feeling the room narrow. Coincidence is the city's favorite disguise. He pulled the old interview transcripts and found the note, scribbled in the margin years ago, unknown caller, no voicemail. It had been nothing then. It felt heavier now. He began to dig. The man's name was Daniel Cross. In 2007, he was 34, worked irregular hours, bounced between short-term jobs, left little paper trail. He had no connection to Lena on record. No shared workplace. No mutual friends. But his phone number matched the missed call. When detectives had tried to reach it back then, it had been disconnected. Case closed on that lead before it ever opened. Now, with Cross in custody for a separate crime, his old records were suddenly accessible, his past no longer protected by obscurity. Cross denied knowing Lena when questioned recently. Said he didn't remember the number. Said he made a lot of calls back then. The detective listened to the recording, to the cadence of his voice, to the pauses where truth might slip. Cross sounded calm, practiced, like a man used to questions. Used to watching faces for reactions. The detective didn't push yet. He let the silence stretch, let Cross fill it with words that circled but never landed. As the weeks went on, the investigation quietly reignited. No press releases. No family notifications yet. Just movement behind the scenes. The glove was retested. New DNA techniques teased out a partial profile, not enough to name someone outright, but enough to compare. It did not match Lena. That much was obvious. It suggested another presence, another person close enough to leave something behind. The profile was run through databases, and at first it came back empty. Another dead end. Another almost. But cold cases don't crack with one blow. They fracture slowly. A lab technician, rechecking the data, noticed something odd, a marker that hadn't been catalogued properly years ago. She reran the analysis. This time, the system chimed. A partial match. Familial. A relative, distant but real, linked to Daniel Cross. The room went quiet. Still, nothing was certain. Partial DNA is a whisper, not a shout. It suggests, it doesn't accuse. The detective knew better than to rush. He built the case backward, layering context, searching for motive, opportunity, pattern. Cross had been questioned in 2 other disappearances over the years, never charged, never cleared either. He drifted through cities, through lives, leaving behind unease that never quite rose to proof. In 2007, he'd been between jobs, spending nights out, bars, streets. He knew the area. He knew the rhythms. He knew how to blend. The detective went back to the bar footage, enhanced it with modern software, slowing frames, sharpening shadows. The man behind Lena at 9:49 p.m. remained a blur, but his height, his build, his gait began to take shape. When compared to Cross's booking photos from later years, the resemblance was enough to make the detective's pulse jump. Not confirmation. Not yet. But the story was starting to align in a way it never had before. The city, oblivious, continued on. People passed the corner where Lena had last been clearly seen, unaware that the air there still held questions. Her family, still waiting, still living with the ache, sensed nothing yet. The detective delayed the call, knowing what it would unleash. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've learned to survive without it. He interrogated Cross again, this time with more on the table, more confidence in his silence. He mentioned the glove. The missed call. The bar. Cross's eyes flickered, just once, a micro-expression gone almost as soon as it appeared. He leaned back, crossed his arms, smiled thinly. Said nothing. Silence can be a confession if you know how to read it. Outside the interview room, the detective stood alone for a moment, feeling the weight of years pressing in. This case had lived longer unsolved than some careers. It had outlasted relationships, buildings, versions of the city itself. To touch its edges now felt like trespassing in a grave that might still be empty. Or full. There were still gaps. Still questions. Still no body. New York had swallowed Lena whole, and even now, it was unclear what it would ever give back. But the shape of the silence had changed again. It was no longer flat. It had contours. Depth. A direction. Somewhere in the distance, the past stirred, restless, as if it sensed it was being followed at last, and the investigation, once cold and dormant, began to warm, the slow heat of possibility building, threatening to turn a disappearance into something else entirely, something named, something faced, something that would finally force the city to remember what it had tried so hard to forget. The city has a way of hiding its secrets in plain sight, burying them beneath routine and repetition, and as the investigation tightened around Daniel Cross, the streets where Lena Hart had last walked seemed unchanged, indifferent, as if they had never witnessed a thing, the detective returned to those streets anyway, because paper can only take you so far before you have to feel the ground under your feet, measure distances with your own steps, let the noise and the movement tell you what reports never can. He walked the route from the bar to Lena's apartment at the same hour she would have, listening to the city breathe, watching how shadows pulled in doorways, how easily one person could drift close to another without drawing a second glance. It was easy. Too easy. That realization settled heavy in his chest. He stopped where the glove had been found, a stretch of sidewalk now scrubbed clean by years of weather and traffic. In 2007, it had been just another detail, logged and forgotten. Standing there now, he imagined the moment it fell, imagined hands fumbling, a brief struggle maybe, or a hurried movement, something sudden enough to tear fabric from possession. No one had heard anything definitive. No one had seen anything clear. That was the curse of the case. Everything happened just below the threshold of notice. Back at the precinct, the detective pulled Cross's movements from that period as best he could reconstruct them. Cell towers painted a rough picture, broad strokes rather than lines, but they placed Cross in the area that night, lingering longer than he claimed. His statements from years later shifted subtly under comparison. Times moved. Details softened. Memory, he said. Time does that. But memory also sharpens where guilt lives, and the detective suspected Cross remembered more than he let on. They brought in a behavioral analyst, someone who specialized in cold cases, in men who moved through lives without leaving obvious scars until it was too late. The analyst read the file, listened to the recordings, watched the footage, and then leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes distant. This wasn't a crime of passion, she said. It didn't feel impulsive. It felt opportunistic. A man who saw a woman alone, confident, unguarded, and decided in a matter of seconds to test how invisible he could be. Someone who thrived on the idea that the city would do the rest of the work for him. The detective thought of the missed call again. 10:03 p.m. A wrong number, they'd said. But what if it wasn't wrong at all? What if it was bait? A way to see if she would answer, if she was distracted, if she would slow down, check her phone, break her rhythm for just long enough. The idea crawled under his skin. He went back to the footage and found the moment Lena checked her phone at 9:47, the slight pause, the way her posture changed. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it felt like a hinge point, a small action that might have shifted everything that followed. Cross was brought in again, this time under the pretense of clarifying old records. The detective didn't accuse. He let the room fill with history, with silence, with the weight of a name that had never been resolved. He talked about Lena, not as a victim, but as a person. Her job. Her habits. The way her family still waited. He watched Cross's face as he spoke, watched for cracks. There were moments when Cross's gaze drifted, when his jaw tightened, when he breathed out slowly, like a man bracing himself against something pressing in from the inside. Still, he denied everything. Still, there was no confession. The problem was the same one that had haunted the case from the start. No body. No crime scene. No single piece of evidence that could stand alone in court and speak without being questioned. The partial DNA whispered but did not shout. The timeline suggested but did not prove. Everything relied on accumulation, on the idea that enough small truths could eventually outweigh the absence of one large one. Prosecutors were cautious. They'd seen cases crumble under less. They warned the detective not to rush, not to let momentum masquerade as certainty. Meanwhile, the case began to leak. It always does. A file pulled from storage, a suspect questioned again, a lab result whispered down a hallway. Reporters started calling. Old headlines resurfaced, updated with a single dangerous word, breakthrough. Lena's sister got the call before the news broke, her phone lighting up with a number she hadn't seen in years. The detective's voice was careful, measured, but she heard the shift immediately. Something was happening. For the first time in a long time, the ache sharpened into something like hope, and that frightened her more than despair ever had. The public reacted fast. Online forums ignited again, sleuths poring over the scraps released to the press, matching Cross's face to grainy screenshots, debating his guilt with the fervor of a jury that didn't yet exist. Some cautioned restraint. Others were certain. The city remembered Lena, briefly, intensely, as if the years between had collapsed. Flyers were reposted digitally, her smile circulating once more, framed now by speculation and accusation. Under that pressure, the investigation pushed forward. Detectives canvassed Cross's known associates from 2007, people who had drifted out of his life since. Many were hard to find. Some were dead. Others remembered him vaguely, a man who came and went, who asked questions, who seemed to be watching even when he spoke. One woman, a former girlfriend, hesitated before telling them about a night years ago when Cross had come home late, agitated, his hand scratched, his clothes smelling like rain and metal. She hadn't thought much of it then. She had learned not to ask. Now, she wondered what she'd ignored. They searched old storage units linked to Cross, places long abandoned, decode, their contents forgotten even by the man who rented them. Most held nothing but debris, the detritus of a transient life. One contained a box of women's accessories, scarves, gloves, jewelry mismatched and unremarkable on their own, but together unsettling in their volume. None could be definitively linked to Lena. No names. No proof. Just implication, heavy and suffocating. The detective felt the case tightening and slipping at the same time, like trying to hold smoke in his hands. Every new detail made the picture clearer and the path to resolution more treacherous. Without a body, defense attorneys would dismantle the narrative piece by piece, turning absence into doubt, doubt into acquittal. The detective knew this. He'd seen it before. Cold cases don't just need truth. They need something tangible, something undeniable. He returned again to the idea that the city itself might hold that missing piece. New York keeps records on everything if you know where to look. Old transit logs. Maintenance reports. Construction records. He started scanning for disruptions along Lena's route in the days after her disappearance, anything unusual, anything sealed off, moved, altered. It was tedious, unglamorous work, the kind that rarely makes headlines. Hours blurred into nights. Then a small note caught his eye. A maintenance report from October 2007, filed 2 days after Lena vanished, about an emergency repair in a service tunnel connected to the subway line near her route. A complaint about a foul odor. A brief inspection. The issue marked resolved. No further details. At the time, it had been routine, one of thousands. Now, it felt like a chill running down his spine. He requested the original report, the names of the workers involved, the exact location. The tunnel was inaccessible now, altered by renovations over the years, but in 2007, it had been a dark, rarely used artery beneath the city. A place where sound dies quickly. A place where something could disappear without ceremony. The detective didn't tell anyone yet. Not the press. Not the family. He needed more than a hunch before he reopened that wound. He needed to be sure that he wasn't chasing another shadow, another maybe. But as he stared at the report, at the date, at the proximity to Lena's last known location, he felt that familiar tightening again, the sense that the case was drawing him somewhere it had resisted going for years. Above ground, the city roared on, oblivious, commuters flooding platforms, trains screaming through tunnels that held more history than anyone cared to imagine. Somewhere below, sealed behind concrete and time, the past waited, patient and silent, and the detective understood that if the truth was ever going to surface, it would not do so gently. It would have to be pulled into the light, piece by piece, against the weight of years, against a city that had learned how to forget, and against the terrifying possibility that even now, after all this time, some answers might remain just out of reach, locked in the dark where Lena Hart had vanished and where the echoes of her last night still lingered, unheard but never gone. The service tunnel existed in the city's memory the way scars exist on a body, covered by layers of repair and progress, forgotten until you run your fingers across them and feel the old damage underneath. The detective stood at the edge of the access point with a transit official who kept glancing at his watch, impatience thinly veiled, because to most people this was ancient history, an inconvenience resurrected. To the detective, it felt like standing at the mouth of something that had been swallowing answers for 16 years. The air that drifted up from below was cooler, damp, carrying a faint metallic smell that clung to the back of the throat. He closed his eyes for a moment and imagined October 2007, imagined this place darker, less regulated, less watched. The maintenance report was vague, almost aggressively so. Foul odor detected. Area inspected. No hazard found. Case closed. The workers involved had been 2 contractors, one deceased, one retired to a town upstate where time moved slower and memories had room to surface. The detective tracked him down and sat across from him at a kitchen table stained with coffee rings and age. The man squinted at the photocopied report, shook his head, said it had all blended together over the years. They'd been in and out of hundreds of tunnels. Dozens of smells. Rotting trash. Dead animals. Sewage. You learn not to ask too many questions underground, he said. You do the job, you get out. But something tugged at him. The detective could see it in the way the man's fingers tapped against the paper, in the way his gaze lingered on the date. October 2007. 2 days after a woman disappeared. The detective asked him to walk through that inspection slowly, minute by minute, as if narrating a film. The man sighed, leaned back, and began. It was late. The tunnel was quiet. The smell was strong at first, then faded as they moved deeper. They didn't find an obvious source. No animal. No spill. They chalked it up to transient waste, something washed away or dried out. It wasn't their job to investigate further. It never was. The detective asked if they'd noticed anything else. Anything unusual. The man hesitated, then shrugged. There had been something, he said. A section of tunnel blocked off with temporary barriers, construction materials stacked in a way that didn't quite make sense. He'd assumed another crew was working nearby. It happened all the time. The city was a patchwork of overlapping projects. No one coordinated as well as they should. He hadn't gone past the barriers. No authorization. No curiosity. Underground, curiosity can get you killed. Back in the present, standing above the same location, the detective felt the weight of that decision pressing through the years. Barriers move. Concrete gets poured. Records get lost. The tunnel had been partially sealed in a renovation 5 years after Lena vanished, its access points reduced, its interior reshaped. Whatever had been there in 2007 was gone now, entombed or erased. But absence leaves traces too, if you know how to read them. He ordered a ground-penetrating radar scan of the area, careful to frame it as routine infrastructure assessment to avoid attention. The machines hummed, operators watched their screens, lines and shapes forming abstract patterns that only specialists could interpret. The detective stood behind them, heart pounding despite himself. He had chased ghosts before. He knew how hope could mislead. Still, when one of the operators paused, zoomed in, and frowned, the room seemed to tilt. There was an anomaly. A section of disturbed ground inconsistent with the surrounding structure. Not definitive. Not conclusive. But different. The kind of different that demands explanation. The detective requested further analysis, samples if possible, knowing every step would require permission, paperwork, justification. Bureaucracy is a wall as solid as concrete, and sometimes just as suffocating. As word filtered back to the precinct, the case gained a new gravity. Prosecutors listened more closely now. The possibility of a hidden disposal site, even a long-altered one, changed the equation. Still, caution ruled. Excavation was invasive, expensive, politically sensitive. And what if they found nothing? Another empty space added to a case already defined by emptiness. Daniel Cross remained in custody on his unrelated charges, aware that something was shifting around him. His attorney requested updates, filed motions, tried to slow the momentum. Cross himself grew quieter in interviews, his earlier confidence replaced by a guarded stillness. When the detective mentioned the tunnels casually, as if in passing, Cross's composure cracked for half a second, a tightening around the eyes, a swallow too deliberate to be accidental. The detective noted it, filed it away, another small weight on the scale. Lena's family was finally brought in. The detective sat across from them in a small, neutral room designed to soften bad news and rarely succeeding. He spoke carefully, choosing words that balanced honesty with restraint. New information had come to light. Old evidence was being re-examined. There were possibilities. No guarantees. Lena's mother listened with hands folded tightly in her lap, her face a study in practiced endurance. Her sister leaned forward, every muscle taut, hope and fear warring openly in her eyes. They had lived too long with nothing to grasp at. Even a fragile maybe felt overwhelming. Outside that room, the city's interest reignited. The mention of tunnels, of buried secrets, was irresistible. Headlines sharpened again. New lead in 2007 disappearance. Subway tunnel may hold clues. The story took on a darker hue, the mundane terror of infrastructure turning sinister. People commuted with a new awareness, glancing at walls and floors, wondering what histories lay beneath their feet. Permission for limited excavation was granted under strict conditions. Night work. Minimal disruption. A small team sworn to silence. The detective stood with them as they cut into the concrete, sparks flying, the sound echoing in the confined space. Each layer peeled back felt like an intrusion into something sacred and profane at once. Dust filled the air. Time stretched. They found nothing at first. Just old fill. Debris. The remnants of previous work. Doubt crept in, heavy and familiar. The detective braced himself for disappointment, for the possibility that this too would collapse into another unanswered question. Then a worker's tool struck something different, a hollow sound beneath the noise. They stopped. Switched to finer instruments. Exposed a pocket, sealed and unnatural. Inside were fragments. Fabric fibers. A rusted piece of metal that might once have been part of a personal item. Bone? The forensic team moved in, careful, methodical. No one spoke above a whisper. In that moment, the tunnel felt like a church, the air thick with reverence and dread. The detective watched, heart hammering, knowing that even now, certainty was not guaranteed. Time distorts everything. Evidence degrades. Context erodes. Preliminary analysis suggested human remains, incomplete, degraded by moisture and age. Not enough to immediately identify. Not enough to conclusively link to Lena. But enough to change everything. The city had not swallowed her without leaving a mark. It had only hidden it well. The news broke anyway. It always does. Possible human remains found in cold case. The words ricocheted through media and memory alike. Lena's face appeared again, framed now by images of tunnels and police tape. Her family received the call they had both dreaded and awaited for years. The possibility that she might finally be found, even in pieces, brought a complicated wave of grief, relief, terror. Closure is a promise that rarely arrives clean. Daniel Cross was informed of the discovery. He said nothing at first. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that startled even his attorney. Coincidence, he said. New York is built on bones. You could dig anywhere and find something. The detective watched him closely, saw the tension vibrating just beneath the bravado. Cross was right, in a way. The city is layered with the past. But timing is everything, and this timing was suffocating. Forensics worked around the clock. Every fragment was catalogued, tested, compared against what little reference material they had from Lena's belongings. DNA extraction was painstaking, uncertain. Days passed in a blur of waiting. The detective slept poorly, his mind looping through possibilities, rehearsing conversations he might soon have to have, outcomes he could not control. When the results came, they were incomplete but devastating. The DNA profile was consistent with Lena Hart. Not definitive enough to declare beyond all doubt, but strong enough to support the conclusion. The absence that had defined the case for so long was beginning to take shape, and that shape was unbearable. Prosecutors moved quickly, sensing the window. They charged Daniel Cross in connection with Lena's disappearance and presumed death, building the case on accumulation, the missed call, the partial DNA, the tunnel, the behavioral patterns. It was risky. Defense attorneys circled like sharks, ready to tear apart every inference, every assumption. No eyewitness. No confession. No complete body. The case balanced on a knife's edge. As Cross was led into court, cameras flashed, the city holding its breath. Lena's family watched from the gallery, their expressions unreadable, years of emotion compressed into a single moment. The detective sat behind them, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavy on his shoulders. He had pulled the past into the light, but light doesn't always bring clarity. Sometimes it only reveals how much darkness remains. The tunnel was sealed again after the excavation, concrete poured over the opening, the city moving to reclaim its routines. Trains roared past, commuters stared at their phones, unaware of the history now layered beneath their journey. Above ground, the case entered a new phase, one defined not by searching but by arguing, by interpretation, by the cold calculus of the courtroom. And still, questions lingered. How exactly had Lena been taken? What moments had passed between the last camera frame and the darkness underground? Had she known her fate, or had it come swift and silent? The fragments could not answer that. They could only testify to loss. As the trial loomed, the detective understood that resolution, if it came at all, would be imperfect. Even a conviction would not restore what had been taken, would not fill the years carved out of a family's life. The city would move on again, as it always does, filing this case under solved or unsolved depending on the verdict. But beneath that label, beneath the concrete and noise, the truth would remain complicated, fractured, a reminder that some mysteries resist clean endings, and that even when the silence finally breaks, what it reveals can haunt just as deeply as what it once concealed. The courtroom air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that settles when a story everyone thinks they know is about to be argued into something fragile and uncertain. Daniel Cross sat at the defense table, expression neutral, hands folded, the picture of a man who had learned how to disappear in plain sight even when the lights were trained on him. Across the aisle, the prosecution stacked their files, each folder a fragment of a life that had vanished into tunnels and time. Behind them, Lena Hart's family filled the gallery, silent, braced, carrying 16 years of waiting into a room where every word would now be weighed and weaponized. From the first motion, the defense made its strategy clear. This was not a trial about what might have happened, they said, but about what could be proven. No eyewitness. No confession. No complete remains. A city full of tunnels and bones and forgotten debris. Coincidence masquerading as certainty. They spoke calmly, methodically, sowing doubt with practiced ease. The prosecution listened, faces unreadable, knowing this was the terrain they would have to cross. When the trial began in earnest, the detective took the stand early, his testimony laying the spine of the case. He spoke of the missed call, the partial DNA, the glove, the tunnel, the anomaly beneath the concrete. He described the years of silence, the way the case had gone cold not because it lacked significance but because it lacked traction. He spoke without flourish, aware that every inflection could be twisted. Under cross-examination, the defense pressed hard, forcing him to admit the gaps, the assumptions, the places where inference filled the void left by absence. The detective did not flinch. He acknowledged the uncertainty. He did not claim omniscience. He claimed persistence. The forensic experts followed, their language precise, careful. DNA consistent with Lena Hart, they said, not conclusively identical. Degraded samples. Partial profiles. Statistical likelihoods that sounded impressive until stripped of context. The defense pounced, translating science into doubt, numbers into questions. Could the remains belong to someone else? Possibly. Could the tunnel have contained older material, unrelated to Lena's disappearance? Yes. The jury listened, pens scratching, faces tight, the weight of decision settling slowly. Outside the courtroom, the media spun every development into breaking news. Prosecution struggles to prove case. Defense questions tunnel evidence. Commentators argued late into the night, dividing lines drawn along belief and skepticism. Some saw Cross as the embodiment of long-delayed justice, finally cornered. Others saw a man being tried on suspicion and circumstance, the city's hunger for closure threatening to outrun proof. Lena's name trended again, her face shared millions of times, her story compressed into headlines that could never hold its full gravity. Then came the witnesses who had not spoken before. Cross's former girlfriend took the stand, her voice steady but strained as she described the night he came home late, scratched, restless, refusing to explain. The defense painted her as unreliable, her memory colored by time and resentment. She held her ground, insisting she remembered because it had frightened her, because something in his eyes that night had not faded with the years. The jury watched closely, searching her face for cracks, for motive, for truth. The retired maintenance worker testified next, recounting the inspection in the tunnel, the smell, the barriers, the sense that something had been off even then. He admitted he hadn't looked closer, hadn't questioned it. The defense seized on that too. No training in forensic identification. No authority to investigate. Assumptions layered on assumptions. The worker's shoulders sagged as he spoke, the weight of hindsight pressing down. He hadn't known. That was the point. No one had known. Daniel Cross finally took the stand in his own defense, a calculated risk that electrified the room. He spoke softly, confidently, denying any involvement, framing his life as chaotic but not criminal, misunderstood but not monstrous. He explained the missed call as a wrong number, the phone records as coincidence, the DNA as contamination or error. When asked about the tunnels, he shrugged, repeating his line about New York being built on bones. His attorney guided him carefully, keeping him away from speculation, from emotion. Under cross-examination, the prosecution tightened the focus. Why had he been in the area that night? Why had his phone records placed him near Lena's route? Why had his DNA, even partially, appeared on an item found along that path? Cross answered smoothly, each response reasonable on its own, collectively evasive. The prosecutor pressed harder, invoking Lena's name, her family, the years of waiting. Cross's jaw clenched. For a moment, it seemed like something might crack. Then it didn't. He held. The trial stretched on, days blurring into weeks, testimony stacking like sediment. The jury was sent out to deliberate with instructions that echoed in the silence, decide based on evidence, not sympathy, not speculation. They filed into the jury room carrying a case that refused to be simple, a story that resisted a clean ending. Waiting is its own kind of punishment. Lena's family sat together, hands intertwined, replaying testimony, parsing expressions, trying to read the future in the past. The detective waited too, restless, aware that once a case reaches this point, it belongs to others. He had brought the silence to the surface. What the world did with it was no longer his to control. After 3 days, the jury returned. The courtroom filled again, breath held collectively as the foreperson stood. The verdict came down like a blunt instrument. Not guilty on the charge of murder. Guilty on a lesser count related to obstruction and evidence tampering connected to the tunnel site. A compromise verdict, a reflection of doubt and belief colliding. Gasps rippled through the room. Lena's mother closed her eyes. Her sister exhaled sharply, the sound halfway between relief and despair. Daniel Cross showed little reaction, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before it smoothed again. He would serve time, but not for taking Lena's life. Not officially. The prosecution accepted the outcome with rigid composure. Appeals were discussed. Statements prepared. The machinery of justice ground on. In the days that followed, the city debated the meaning of the verdict. Was this justice delayed and diluted? Or restraint in the face of uncertainty? Headlines struggled to frame it. Partial verdict in 2007 disappearance. Questions remain after cross-conviction. The case slipped back into that familiar liminal space, neither fully solved nor entirely unresolved. The tunnel remained sealed, the excavation site erased, the city eager to move forward. Lena's remains, what little had been recovered, were laid to rest in a private ceremony, a marker finally placed for a life that had existed too long as a question. Her family grieved anew, grief reshaped by knowledge that came too late and not complete enough. The detective returned to his routine, new cases stacking up, the past receding but never gone. He knew the truth of cold cases: resolution is rarely absolute. Sometimes it arrives fragmented, compromised, leaving room for doubt to live alongside certainty. He believed Cross had been responsible. He believed the city had helped hide it. But belief is not proof, and proof had its limits. Years later, the story would resurface again, as these stories always do, retold in podcasts and documentaries, framed as a disappearance that was solved and not solved, a case that offered answers without satisfaction. Viewers would argue. Commentators would speculate. Lena's name would be spoken by people who never knew her, her life reduced to a narrative of mystery and loss. And beneath all of it, the city would continue, trains rattling through tunnels layered with history, people walking routes without knowing whose footsteps had once echoed there. The silence that began with a ringing phone would never fully lift. It would linger, reshaped but persistent, a reminder that some stories end not with clarity but with an uneasy quiet, the kind that settles when the truth has been touched but never fully held, and when the question of what really happened refuses, stubbornly, to disappear. After the verdict, the city exhaled and immediately inhaled something else, something newer, louder, because that is what it does when a story refuses to end cleanly. The courthouse steps emptied, cameras packed away, commentators moved on to the next breaking headline, but for those still inside the gravity of the case, the noise only changed pitch. Daniel Cross was transferred to a state facility to serve his sentence on the lesser charges, his name now officially tied to Lena Hart's disappearance but never fused to it in the way everyone expected. He had been judged, but not for the thing that mattered most, and that distinction hung in the air like unfinished business. For Lena's family, the days after the trial felt unreal, as if they were walking through a city rebuilt overnight without warning. There was a grave now, a place to stand and speak her name out loud, a marker that acknowledged she had lived and been lost. That mattered. It mattered more than anyone outside their orbit could fully understand. And yet the word "not guilty" echoed louder than the rest, an unwanted refrain that refused to fade. Closure, they learned, is not a door that swings shut. It is a room you learn to occupy, furnished with compromise. The detective returned to his desk, to fresh files and new faces, but the Lena Hart case did not file itself away quietly. It followed him into idle moments, into the long gaps between calls, into the sound of trains passing beneath the city at night. He replayed testimony in his head, cross-examinations, the way Cross had answered certain questions too smoothly, the way he had laughed when confronted with the idea of buried remains. Laughter can be armor. It can also be a leak. The detective knew that, and it gnawed at him. Officially, the case was marked as closed, resolved to the extent the law allowed. Unofficially, it lingered in the margins. Tips still came in, even after the verdict, people emboldened by the publicity to share things they had dismissed years earlier. A man who thought he'd seen Lena arguing with someone near a service entrance. A woman who claimed she'd heard crying in the tunnels late one night in 2007. None of it could be verified now. Time had sanded down details, turned memories into approximations. Still, the detective logged them, because ignoring the past had already cost too much. Daniel Cross adapted to incarceration the way he seemed to adapt to everything else, quickly, quietly, becoming another face in a controlled environment. He gave no interviews. He wrote no letters that surfaced publicly. When approached by investigators hoping he might trade information for leniency, he declined. He had already given the system enough, he said. Anything more would be a lie. Whether that was true or not was impossible to tell. Silence, in his hands, remained a tool. Years passed. Technology advanced again, leaping forward in ways that made old evidence feel suddenly young. Touch DNA. New algorithms. Better recovery from degraded samples. The detective watched these developments with cautious interest. Hope had burned him before. Still, he quietly requested that the remaining fragments from the tunnel be re-examined once more, pushed through the newest processes. The lab agreed, though expectations were low. You cannot conjure clarity from nothing, no matter how advanced the tools. The results came back incremental, frustrating. Slightly stronger matches. Marginal improvements. Enough to reinforce old conclusions but not enough to rewrite them. Lena's presence was there, a ghost in the data, undeniable and incomplete. The partial DNA linked again, distantly but persistently, to Cross's family line. Defense attorneys would tear it apart just as easily as before. The law had drawn its line, and it was unlikely to move. The story, however, refused to stay still. A podcast picked it up, branding it as a disappearance that was solved but unsettled. Millions listened. They heard Lena's voice through old voicemails, heard the bartender's recollection, the detective's careful words, Cross's clipped denials. They argued online, forming camps, parsing tone and timing as if truth could be teased out of audio alone. Some were convinced Cross was guilty beyond question. Others insisted he was a convenient villain in a case starved for resolution. The discourse grew loud, then louder, then toxic, until Lena's name once again felt like collateral damage. Her sister listened to the podcast once and never again. It felt wrong, hearing her life reduced to narrative beats, to cliffhanger and ad breaks. And yet, part of her was grateful that people still cared, that Lena had not slipped entirely into the past. Attention is a strange form of preservation. It keeps stories from dying, even when it distorts them. One episode focused on the tunnel, on the idea that the city's hidden spaces enable perfect crimes. Engineers and historians chimed in, talking about forgotten corridors, sealed chambers, undocumented changes made during decades of expansion. New York, they said, is a palimpsest. You build over what you want to forget. Listening to it, the detective felt a familiar chill. The city hadn't just hidden Lena. It had cooperated, unintentionally but effectively. A former inmate from Cross's facility contacted authorities after hearing the podcast, claiming Cross had spoken about a girl in the tunnels during a late-night conversation. Jailhouse informants are notoriously unreliable, their motivation suspect, their stories often tailored to whatever they think someone wants to hear. Still, the detective interviewed him, listening without interruption. The details were vague, impressionistic. Nothing that hadn't already been speculated publicly. When pressed, the inmate admitted he couldn't be sure Cross was serious. He talked a lot, he said. Sometimes people talk just to feel powerful. The lead went nowhere, joining the others in the long hallway of almosts. But it reopened the ache, reminded everyone how thin the line was between knowledge and guessing. The detective wondered, not for the first time, whether Cross took pleasure in that ambiguity, whether leaving questions unanswered was part of the crime itself. Lena's apartment building changed owners. Her old unit was renovated, walls repainted, floors replaced. New tenants moved in, unaware of the history soaked into the place. Life went on, aggressively, relentlessly. The bar where she'd last been seen closed, reopened under a new name, its past erased by branding and lighting and different music. Only the street remained constant, absorbing footsteps without comment. On the anniversary of her disappearance, her family still gathered quietly. No cameras now. No speeches. Just candles and memory and the shared understanding that what they had was incomplete but real. They talked about Lena as she had been, not as the case described her. Her laugh. Her stubbornness. The way she planned too far ahead and worried too much about small things. That was their resistance, their refusal to let the mystery define her entirely. The detective attended one of those gatherings once, standing slightly apart, unsure of his place. Lena's sister thanked him anyway, for not letting the case rot, for forcing the city to look back even when it wanted to forget. He accepted the thanks with discomfort. he knew how much he hadn't been able to give them. Gratitude, in this context, felt undeserved and heavy. Late one night, years after the trial, the detective found himself riding the subway past the stretch of tunnel where the remains had been found. The train roared through darkness, lights flickering, the sensation of speed blurring edges and details. For a moment, he imagined the tunnel as it had been in 2007, imagined Lena's last conscious thoughts, the shock of violence, the sudden understanding that something irreversible was happening. He pushed the thought away. Speculation is a dangerous habit. But the image lingered anyway. The case would never reopen officially unless something seismic surfaced. A confession. New remains. A mistake laid bare. Until then, it would exist in a kind of suspended state, claimed by neither certainty nor ignorance. Solved enough to move on. Unsolved enough to haunt. And that, perhaps, was the most unsettling outcome of all. Not the lack of answers, but the presence of answers that refused to align, that formed a picture you could almost see if you tilted your head just right. The city lived with that kind of tension all the time. It was built into its foundations, into the layers of concrete and history beneath every step. Somewhere, Daniel Cross marked time, his days reduced to routine, his nights filled with whatever memories he allowed himself to keep. Somewhere else, Lena Hart's name continued to circulate, spoken by strangers, anchored by family, tethered to a story that would never fully let her go. And between them lay the city, vast and indifferent, carrying the weight of what it had hidden and what it had revealed, humming with motion, alive with noise, and still, in its deepest places, holding on to silence. Time did what it always does after a case slips out of the spotlight. It blurred edges, softened outrage, folded sharp questions into routine. But underneath that surface calm, the Lena Hart disappearance never truly settled. It lived in footnotes and late-night conversations, in the minds of people who had followed it too closely to forget, in the quiet unease that follows stories without clean endings. The verdict had closed the courtroom doors, not the narrative, and the city carried that unfinished weight the way it carries everything else, by moving forward without looking down. Daniel Cross served his sentence quietly, avoiding trouble, avoiding attention, becoming unremarkable by design. Prison records described him as compliant, reserved, a man who kept to himself. Guards noted nothing unusual. Psych evaluations flagged no new concerns. On paper, he was exactly what he wanted to be, forgettable. But inside the system, people talk. Patterns emerge. And over time, small details began to circulate among those trained to notice them. A corrections officer mentioned, almost offhandedly, that Cross avoided certain work assignments, particularly those involving maintenance tunnels and sub-level infrastructure within the facility. He volunteered for kitchen duty instead, for laundry, for anything that kept him in open, well-lit spaces. It could have meant nothing. Plenty of inmates have preferences. But for someone whose name had become synonymous with underground spaces, the avoidance felt pointed. The note made its way into a file, unremarked upon officially, but remembered. Outside, the podcast attention faded, replaced by new cases, new mysteries. Lena's story became part of a larger canon of unresolved disappearances, cited as an example, a cautionary tale. Her name was spoken alongside others, her individuality slowly dissolving into category. This troubled her sister more than she expected. Being remembered is not the same as being known, and she worried that the world was beginning to remember Lena only for how she vanished, not for how she lived. She began speaking privately to writers and researchers who approached her with genuine care, insisting on context, on humanity. She corrected details. She pushed back against sensationalism. She talked about Lena's habits, her optimism, her tendency to trust. Not as blame, never as blame, but as texture. If people were going to tell the story, she wanted it told with weight. During one of those conversations, a writer mentioned something that made her pause. A line buried in a police supplement from years ago, barely referenced in the media. A transit worker, not the maintenance inspector, but a night supervisor, had logged an irregularity on the same stretch of tunnel a week before Lena disappeared. Unauthorized access. No follow-up recorded. It had been dismissed at the time as paperwork noise. The writer had found it while cross-referencing public records. Lena's sister felt that familiar tightening, the sensation of a door creaking open just enough to let light through. She contacted the detective, long since reassigned, nearing retirement now, his career shaped in part by this case whether he wanted it to be or not. He listened carefully as she relayed what she'd heard. The name of the supervisor was unfamiliar to him. That bothered him. He prided himself on knowing every inch of that file. He pulled the record himself. There it was. Date, time, location. A brief note, access panel found unsecured. No active work order. No indication of who had opened it. No escalation. In a city that runs on overlapping responsibilities, things fall through cracks all the time. But cracks are where people disappear. The detective felt the old pulse again, that mixture of excitement and dread. He knew the odds. He knew how unlikely it was that this would change anything officially. Still, he reached out to the transit authority, framed the inquiry as historical research. Bureaucracy resisted, then relented, then stalled. Eventually, he got a name. The supervisor had retired years earlier, relocated to Florida, the kind of ending that makes conversations feel both urgent and fragile. They spoke over the phone first. The man's memory was foggy, as expected, but when the detective mentioned the date, the tunnel, something shifted. The supervisor went quiet, then said he remembered being annoyed that night. Someone had accessed a restricted area without clearance. He'd assumed it was a contractor cutting corners. He logged it and moved on. That was his job. He wasn't paid to investigate motives. The detective asked if he remembered anything else. Any description. Any interaction. The supervisor hesitated. Then said there had been a man, hanging around the access point earlier that evening, asking questions about schedules, about maintenance windows. Not aggressive. Not suspicious enough to call security. Just curious. People ask questions all the time. In hindsight, everything feels suspicious. But the man had stood out just enough to stick in his mind, like a loose thread. The detective asked for a description. The supervisor gave what he could. Height. Build. A certain way of speaking. Nothing definitive. Nothing a defense attorney couldn't shred. Still, when the detective compared it to Daniel Cross's known appearance at the time, the overlap was uncomfortable. Not proof. But not nothing either. The information was forwarded to prosecutors, who reviewed it with professional detachment. The case, they reminded him, had been adjudicated. Double jeopardy applied. Unless new evidence fundamentally altered the facts, there was nothing to be done. The obstruction conviction stood. The rest would remain in the realm of belief. The detective understood. He also understood that truth does not always align with legal thresholds. Sometimes it hovers just below them, visible but untouchable. He shared the information with Lena's sister anyway, careful not to inflate its significance, careful not to offer false hope. She thanked him, her voice steady, though the ache was audible beneath it. That night, she lay awake thinking about tunnels and access panels and missed opportunities. She wondered how many moments like that had existed, how many times the story might have shifted if someone had paused a second longer, asked one more question. The thought was exhausting. There is no end to that kind of imagining. It eats you alive if you let it. Daniel Cross became eligible for parole review as the years ticked by, his sentence nearing its end. The prospect unsettled people who had followed the case closely. Opinion pieces resurfaced. Victim advocacy groups spoke out. Lena's family was notified, the process laid out in clinical language. They prepared statements, words honed to convey impact without speculation, pain without accusation. They knew the rules. They had learned them the hard way. At the parole hearing, Cross spoke briefly. He acknowledged the conviction he had received. He expressed regret for mistakes. He did not mention Lena by name. He did not confess. He did not deny. He existed in that familiar grey zone where responsibility is acknowledged abstractly but never claimed. The board listened, weighed risk assessments and behavior reports, the calculus of public safety against the principle of rehabilitation. The decision was delayed. More review needed. More time. The waiting resumed, smaller in scale but no less draining. Lena's sister realized then that the case would never truly release them. Even in pieces, even settled in the eyes of the law, it would continue to assert itself at intervals, demanding attention, reopening wounds. The detective attended the parole hearing as an observer, his presence unofficial, personal. Watching Cross speak, he searched for something, anything, that might signal truth pressing against restraint. He saw none. Or maybe he saw it everywhere, in the careful neutrality, the controlled effect. People reveal themselves differently. Some through words. Others through what they refuse to say. Afterward, the detective walked the city for hours, past the old bar, past Lena's building, past entrances to spaces most people never notice. He thought about the nature of cold cases, how they age not just in years but in meaning. At first, they are urgent. Then tragic. Then historical. Each stage distances the living from the moment of harm. Each stage makes resolution less likely and more necessary at the same time. He stopped at a subway entrance and watched people descend, one after another, absorbed in their own lives. None of them knew what had been hidden below these streets, what questions still echoed there. They didn't need to know. Cities function on selective awareness. If everyone felt the full weight of what had happened where they stood, nothing would move. The parole board eventually denied Cross's release, citing the seriousness of the associated case and unresolved concerns. The decision offered temporary relief, nothing more. It did not answer the questions that mattered. It did not change the story's shape. It simply postponed the next chapter. Lena's name faded again from public conversation, settling into that uneasy middle ground between memory and history. Her family continued on, reshaping their lives around the absence, carrying both the knowledge they had gained and the knowledge they would never have. The detective retired not long after, his badge turned in, his career closing without the sense of finality he once imagined it would have. Sometimes, late at night, he still thought about the unsecured access panel, about the man asking questions, about how close the truth might have been to surfacing before sinking again. He knew better than to chase it now. Some pursuits end not because they are finished, but because the pursuer runs out of time. And beneath the city, beneath layers of concrete and noise, the tunnels remained, altered and sealed, their histories compressed into darkness. They did not speak. They did not explain. They simply existed, holding what they had always held, evidence of how easily a life can slip into the margins, and how even when the silence breaks, it never quite tells you everything you want to hear. When Daniel Cross's name surfaced again years later, it did not arrive with sirens or breaking news banners, but in a quiet administrative memo, the kind that rarely travels beyond institutional walls unless someone knows how to listen for it. His parole denial had bought time, not certainty, and time has a way of rearranging priorities. New board members rotated in. Policies shifted. Risk assessments were recalibrated. The past, once heavy enough to anchor decisions, began to feel abstract to people who had not lived through it. Lena Hart's sister learned this the hard way, sitting across from an official who spoke gently about rehabilitation and procedural fairness, about how cases evolve as years pass. The language was careful, sanitized, designed to soothe. She nodded, absorbing it, while a familiar frustration coiled in her chest. The system, she understood, was not built to hold onto ghosts forever. It moves forward by necessity. Families are expected to learn how to do the same. Around the same time, an unexpected development rippled through a different corner of the city. A construction crew working on a major transit upgrade several blocks from the original tunnel site filed an incident report. Nothing dramatic. A brief delay. An unregistered cavity encountered during drilling, inconsistent with existing blueprints. Old infrastructure, likely. The city is full of it. Work paused. Engineers were called in. The report sat in a queue, one of dozens. An analyst in the Transit Authority's archival department noticed the location and frowned. It was adjacent to a decommissioned spur, a remnant from earlier expansions, not well documented, sealed decades ago. She cross-referenced it with historical maintenance maps, then with publicly available excavation records. The pattern tugged at her memory, faint but persistent. She remembered the Lena Hart case not from personal involvement, but from the media saturation years earlier, the tunnel imagery that had lingered. She flagged the report and sent a cautious inquiry up the chain. It was not her job to speculate, but it was her job to notice inconsistencies. The response was lukewarm. Probably nothing. Old debris. The city doesn't stop for every irregularity. Still, protocol required a cursory inspection, if only to ensure structural integrity. A small team was assigned. When the inspection began, no one expected answers. Expectations are dangerous in a city layered with forgotten spaces. The cavity was narrow, partially collapsed, its interior choked with sediment and construction waste. Not a hidden room. Not a deliberate chamber. Just a place where the city had shifted and settled over time. The inspectors documented it, took samples, prepared to move on. Then one of them found something that did not belong to the city. Not rebar. Not pipe. Not concrete. Fabric, compacted and stained, trapped between layers of fill. The work stopped immediately. Procedure took over. Law enforcement was notified. The chain of custody began again, reluctantly, cautiously, because everyone in that room understood the risk of chasing old shadows. The detective was no longer on the force when the call went out, but his former colleagues knew his number. He answered on the second ring, the sound of the city humming faintly behind the voice on the line. As he listened, he felt a familiar tightening, a sensation he had thought retirement might finally loosen. The location. The description. The proximity. It was too close to ignore. He visited the site as a consultant, unofficial but respected, his presence tolerated rather than advertised. The fabric was removed carefully, fragmentary and fragile, like everything else the case had offered. Forensic teams moved in with modern tools, techniques refined by years of progress and failure. No one spoke the name aloud at first. Superstition. Caution. Fear of disappointment. The analysis took weeks. The city barely noticed. There were no headlines yet, no leaks, no urgency. That restraint felt different this time, almost deliberate, as if everyone involved understood the cost of premature hope. When the results finally came back, they were both familiar and unsettling. The DNA profile overlapped with Lena Hart's, stronger than before, clearer, less degraded. Still not perfect. Still subject to challenge. But closer. Close enough to redraw old maps. The discovery reopened internal discussions that had been considered closed. Prosecutors reviewed the findings with narrowed eyes. Double jeopardy still applied. The murder charge could not be retried. But the narrative shifted nonetheless. The remains suggested movement, transport, intent. The tunnel had not been a single endpoint. It had been part of a larger pattern, a network of spaces used and abandoned over time. The detective thought about the unsecured access panel again, about the man asking questions, about how many opportunities the city had offered to someone who knew how to navigate its blind spots. He thought about Daniel Cross's aversion to underground spaces in prison, the way avoidance can signal memory as much as fear. None of it constituted new charges. All of it deepened the shape of what had already been suspected. Lena's family was informed quietly, privately. This time, there were no cameras waiting, no public statements prepared. They gathered in a small room and listened as the information was laid out with clinical care. More remains. More confirmation. Still no absolutes. Lena's mother wept softly, not from surprise, but from exhaustion. Her sister closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of another partial answer. Grief, she had learned, does not move in straight lines. It circles. The media eventually caught wind of it, as it always does, but the tone had changed. Less spectacle. More restraint. Additional evidence found in long-running case. The language reflected collective fatigue, a recognition that this story had already taken enough from everyone involved. Commentators speculated anyway. They always do. But the volume was lower, the edges dulled. Daniel Cross was notified through official channels. He responded with silence. His attorney issued a brief statement emphasizing that the findings did not alter the legal status of the case. No interviews. No reaction. Inside the facility, Cross's behavior reportedly changed little, though a guard noted he requested a transfer to a different housing unit shortly after. Coincidence? Perhaps. Everything is coincidence until it isn't. The parole board took notice. While the new evidence could not support additional charges, it informed risk assessments, colored interpretations of past behavior. Cross's next review was postponed. Again. Time, once more, pressed pause rather than play. The detective stood near the new excavation site one evening after the crews had left, the city settling into night around him. The air smelled like rain and machinery. He thought about how close this discovery had been to never happening at all, how easily it could have remained buried beneath progress. The city does not conspire to hide truth. It simply prioritizes movement over memory. If you stop digging, both literal and figurative, the past stays put. He knew there would be no final reckoning. No confession triggered by conscience or pressure. No dramatic revelation that snapped everything into focus. What there would be, instead, was accumulation. More context. More confirmation. Enough to tilt the story further toward what many had believed all along, without ever crossing the threshold into certainty. Lena's sister visited the site once, escorted, standing behind barriers and caution tape. She did not look down for long. She looked around, at the city moving past, unaware and unstoppable. She thought about the night Lena disappeared, about how ordinary it had been, how unremarkable. Evil, she understood now, rarely announces itself. It slips in through routines, through trust, through spaces everyone assumes are safe because they are familiar. That night, she returned home and opened an old box of Lena's things, items that had survived moves and years because she couldn't bear to let them go. She held a scarf, soft and worn, and tried to remember the last time she'd seen her sister wear it. Memory offered fragments, impressions rather than scenes. That would have to be enough. The city continued its work. The cavity was sealed. The project resumed. Another layer added to the strata of forgetting. Officially, the case remained what it had been, resolved as far as the law was concerned, unresolved where it mattered most. Unofficially, it had shifted again, deepening rather than closing. For those who had followed it from the beginning, the new discovery did not feel like an ending. It felt like confirmation of a truth they had already lived with, a reminder that some stories don't conclude so much as they slowly reveal the limits of what can be known. The silence that once defined Lena Hart's disappearance had been pierced again, but not broken. And beneath the city, beneath the newly poured concrete and the hum of modern transit, the spaces that had once hidden her continued to exist in altered form, reminders of how easily the past folds into the present, and how even when you dig deep enough to find something real, what you uncover rarely arrives whole, rarely speaks clearly, and never gives back everything it took. After the second discovery, the case settled into a new, uneasy phase, one defined less by pursuit than by reckoning. The evidence no longer whispered, it murmured steadily, insistently, a sound too persistent to ignore and too fragmented to resolve. For those closest to it, that hum became part of the background of daily life, an ever-present reminder that the story was still breathing, still unfinished. Daniel Cross aged inside the system. The years marked him in small, ordinary ways, graying hair, slower movements, a posture shaped by confinement. He was no longer the man from the grainy bar footage, no longer the figure of speculation frozen in 2007. Time softened his edges, and in doing so, complicated the public's perception. It is easier to believe in monsters when they stay the same. Watching someone age forces an uncomfortable confrontation with their humanity, however unwelcome. At his next parole review, the room felt colder. The board referenced the newly recovered remains, the reinforced DNA overlap, the pattern of behavior that continued to defy benign explanation. Cross listened, face impassive. When invited to speak, he did so carefully, expressing frustration at being perpetually linked to a crime he had never been convicted of committing. He spoke of accountability in abstract terms, of a desire to move forward. He still did not say Lena's name. That absence landed harder than any denial. The board denied parole again. The language was firmer this time, the reasoning more explicit. Public safety concerns. Incomplete resolution. Outstanding questions. The decision was reported briefly, without fanfare. Another postponement. Another stretch of time carved out and left to wait. Lena's sister read the notice online, alone at her kitchen table, the glow of the screen reflecting off a mug gone cold. Relief came first, then guilt for feeling it, then exhaustion. She had learned not to celebrate these moments. They were temporary, procedural, always contingent. The case had taught her to measure time not in years but in intervals between upheavals. She began writing privately, not for publication, but to reclaim control over the narrative that had so often been taken from her. She wrote about Lena as a child, about shared secrets, about arguments that felt monumental at the time and trivial now. She wrote about the night of the disappearance, not to solve it, but to document the before, the world as it had been when Lena was still unquestionably alive. Writing became a way to anchor memory against erosion. The detective, now fully retired, read about the parole decision in the paper and felt the familiar mix of vindication and futility. The system had made the safer choice. It had also sidestepped the deeper question. He understood both impulses. Law enforcement trains you to accept imperfect outcomes. Life teaches you how hard that acceptance really is. Occasionally, he was contacted by journalists revisiting the case for long-form pieces, anniversaries, retrospectives. He declined most requests. He had said what he could say while it mattered. Now, speaking felt like reopening doors he had spent years learning to close. Silence, he had come to believe, was not always avoidance. Sometimes it was preservation. The city itself offered no commentary. The construction projects moved forward. New tunnels opened. Old ones were sealed. Maps were updated, simplified, cleansed of irregularities. The places where Lena's remains had been found were now indistinguishable from anywhere else, their significance erased by functionality. Commuters passed over them daily, absorbed in screens and schedules, unaware of the history compressed beneath their feet. And yet, the story lingered in subtle ways. A criminology class used the case as a study in circumstantial evidence and urban anonymity. A novelist borrowed elements for a fictional disappearance set in a city that felt eerily familiar. Each retelling shifted the emphasis, highlighting some aspects, muting others. Truth thinned as it spread, but it also endured. One evening, years after the second discovery, a former inmate released from the same facility as Cross reached out to a journalist, claiming to have heard something different this time. Not a boast. Not a half-formed rumor. A conversation, overheard, in which Cross had spoken about losing control, about not meaning for it to go that far. The journalist contacted authorities. Authorities listened. Authorities documented. Authorities ultimately set it aside. Hearsay stacked on hearsay does not reopen cases. It only adds weight to the silence. Still, the word circulated, quietly, among those who had followed the case for years. They fit too neatly into existing beliefs to feel revelatory, and yet their existence unsettled. They suggested that even now, even after verdicts and discoveries and delays, something inside Cross might be shifting, eroding under the pressure of time and repetition. Confessions, when they come, often arrive late, stripped of impact by the years they wasted. Lena's mother passed away not long after, her health declining steadily, her grief a constant undercurrent. At the funeral, Lena's absence felt especially sharp, a double loss folded into one moment. Her sister stood at the graveside and felt a quiet resolve settle over her. The case would outlive many of the people who had carried it. That reality was no longer frightening. It was simply true. In the months that followed, she chose to make parts of her writing public, sharing selected pieces online. Not accusations. Not theories. Memories. The response surprised her. People wrote back, thanking her for reminding them that behind every case file is a life interrupted. The comments were gentler than she expected, less hungry for answers and more attuned to loss. It did not solve anything. It did something else instead. It humanized what had become abstract. Daniel Cross remained where he was, time marking him in slow, irreversible increments. Whether he carried guilt or simply the weight of suspicion, no one could say for certain. His silence endured, as it always had, a barrier no one managed to breach. The city continued to layer itself, past over present, forgetting by building. The tunnels where Lena's story had twisted and disappeared no longer resembled their former selves. They were safer now, brighter, monitored. Progress had done what progress does best, it had reduced the chance of repetition without acknowledging what had come before. And somewhere between those layers, between what was known and what was believed, Lena Hart's disappearance remained suspended. No longer a mystery in the purest sense. Not a solved case either. Something else. A reminder of the limits of investigation, of justice, of certainty itself. The silence that followed her disappearance had been punctured many times over the years, each breach offering sound but not clarity. Now, that silence had settled into something quieter, heavier, a presence rather than a void. It did not demand attention the way it once had. It simply existed, shaping the lives it touched in subtle, lasting ways. And as the city slept and woke and slept again, trains running through tunnels layered with answers and omissions alike, the story remained where it had always been at its core, unresolved, not because no one had tried hard enough, but because some truths resist capture, slipping through systems and years alike, leaving behind only fragments and the enduring knowledge that what was lost can never be fully retrieved. By the time the 20th anniversary of Lena Hart's disappearance approached, the case had transformed again, less an active wound than a scar that still ached in certain weather. The city marked time in infrastructure and anniversaries, and this one arrived quietly, without official statements or renewed appeals. It surfaced instead in private moments, in the way Lena's sister paused on stairways, in the way the retired detective found himself awake before dawn, replaying old routes in his head, measuring distances that no longer mattered but refused to dissolve. Daniel Cross's health began to fail. Nothing dramatic. The slow accumulation of years, stress, and confinement. Medical reports filtered through the system, adding another variable to a case already heavy with contingencies. Compassionate release was mentioned, then deferred, then mentioned again. Each mention rippled outward, stirring debate that felt increasingly abstract to people who had not lived with the story pressed against their ribs for 2 decades. The parole board's language shifted subtly over time. Where once they spoke of public safety, they now spoke of balance. Of proportionality. Of the diminishing returns of continued confinement. The law is a living thing, shaped by precedent and pressure and the quiet exhaustion of maintaining absolutes in a world that resists them. Lena's sister read the memos with a practiced calm she had learned the hard way. Panic wastes energy. Outrage attracts noise. She had come to understand that endurance, not reaction, was the currency of survival. A reporter reached out to her around that time, proposing a long-form piece focused not on the crime, but on its aftermath. On what it means to live inside a question for decades. She hesitated, then agreed, on her terms. No reenactments. No speculation. Just time, rendered honestly. The interview took place in her living room, sunlight catching dust in the air, ordinary and grounding. She spoke about Lena in the present tense without realizing it, then noticed and didn't correct herself. The article ran weeks later, understated and careful. It did not go viral. It did something else instead. It lingered. Readers wrote in quietly, sharing their own unresolved losses, their own stories without endings. The piece reframed the case, not as a failure of justice, but as a study in limits. Limits of systems. Limits of certainty. Limits of what can be repaired once violence has been absorbed into time. Inside the facility, Daniel Cross was offered counseling as part of routine care. He attended sporadically. Therapists noted guarded engagement, selective memory, a tendency to intellectualize rather than feel. One note, buried deep in his file, mentioned a dream he described during a session. Underground spaces. Darkness. Being unable to find an exit. Dreams are not evidence. But they are not nothing either. They reveal the architecture of the mind when it stops pretending to be awake. The retired detective learned of this indirectly, through a former colleague who still believed in sharing small things with the people who had earned them. He nodded when he heard it, unsurprised. Guilt, if it exists, often surfaces sideways. He had stopped waiting for confessions long ago. Confessions are a fantasy we tell ourselves to make uncertainty feel temporary. Another winter came, heavy and wet, the kind that amplifies the city's subterranean noises. Trains echoed differently then, the sound deeper, more resonant. Lena's sister found herself thinking about tunnels again, about how much of life happens out of sight, about how many choices are made in seconds that echo for decades. She wondered whether knowing every detail would actually change anything. The thought startled her. It felt like betrayal. It felt like relief. The city announced a new safety initiative focused on transit infrastructure, improved lighting, expanded monitoring. Press releases cited lessons learned from past incidents, unnamed but present. Progress, finally, had found a way to acknowledge history without naming it. That mattered more than she expected. It did not bring Lena back. It did not solve the case. It suggested that the absence had not been entirely wasted. Daniel Cross's attorney filed a motion citing declining health and time served. The opposition was formal, restrained. No dramatic statements. No moralizing. The board scheduled a review. Again. The cycle repeated, familiar as breathing. Lena's sister prepared her statement and then decided not to submit it. She had said everything she needed to say. Repetition does not always strengthen truth. Sometimes it thins it. At the review, Cross spoke briefly. He looked smaller now, diminished by age and circumstance. He expressed remorse for harm caused without specifying what that harm was. The language was careful, legal, deniable. The board listened, faces composed, hands folded. They asked about accountability. He answered in generalities. They asked about insight. He spoke about consequences. He still did not say her name. The decision came weeks later. Release denied, again, but with a narrower margin. The reasons cited were procedural, cautious, almost apologetic. The system was slowing, negotiating with itself. Time presses on institutions as it does on people. In the aftermath, the detective walked the city one last time with intention, a ritual of sorts. He stood near places that had mattered once and now did not mark themselves as special. He understood something then that had eluded him for years. The case had not been about catching a man. It had been about refusing to let the city's indifference be the final word. In that sense, the work had succeeded, even without the ending everyone wanted. Lena's sister felt a similar shift. The story had stopped demanding things from her. It had become part of the landscape of her life, not an intruder but a feature she navigated around with practiced ease. She still missed Lena every day. She always would. But the missing no longer defined every waking thought. Grief had changed shape, becoming quieter, less sharp, more enduring. As the anniversary passed, unnoticed by most, the city moved through another season. New people arrived. Old ones left. The tunnels beneath the streets carried sound and motion and history without comment. Somewhere inside that network, pieces of the past remained, sealed and inert, no longer evidence, no longer sought. The silence that followed was not empty. It was layered, complex, carrying within it years of effort, of near misses, of partial truths assembled with care. It did not resolve the story. It did not absolve anyone. It did something subtler and perhaps more honest. It marked the moment when the search for certainty finally gave way to acceptance, not acceptance of what happened, but acceptance of what could be known. And in that space, narrow and uneasy, life continued, shaped by absence, informed by memory, moving forward not because the mystery had been solved, but because it no longer owned every step taken in its shadow.